So the Israelites have been traveling in the desert for some time now. They were hungry and thirsty. Provisions for both were scarce. Chapter 16 of the book of Exodus tells us that manna, some kind of flaky carbohydrate, fell from the skies that the people could collect each day and eat. Sometimes there would be quail they could hunt and eat too. God was providing for them daily. This was nowhere near the abundance and variety of a grocery store, but it was enough. It was daily bread. At the outset of chapter 17, we learn of Moses striking a rock with his staff and water flowing from it so that the people might drink. Yes, there was a lot of whining and complaining coming from the people of God, but underneath it all, they were learning a new way of being, of trusting and being present, and knowing that they were provided for and cared for in this day. The pillar of cloud and fire was still guiding and protecting them. There were still campfires featuring stories of their ancestors and celebrations with singing and tambourines. Don't be nostalgic for the past, and don't fret about the future. Just learn to be grateful this day for your daily bread. Be present, be still, and know that God is God. The people of God were free from the bondage of Egypt, and they were on their way towards the promised land. But then something happened. The folk at the back of the pack started getting picked off by enemy forces. It's not mentioned explicitly here in Exodus, but it was recorded later in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 17 and 18, where the author writes, "Remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you came out of Egypt, how he attacked you on the way when you were faint and weary, and cut off your tail, those who were lagging behind, and he did not fear God." Who was Amalek? Well, he was the king of a foreign nation conveniently called the Amalekites. Foreign, but with a shared ancestor to the Israelites. They were descendants of Esau, Jacob's twin brother. So you remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob of the covenant with God? That Jacob, making the Amalekites descendants of Abraham and Isaac too. And the Amalekites were mad that thousands of liberated slaves were about to descend on their oasis. Rephidim was situated in the mountains, and the oasis of Rephidim was where nomads brought cattle to drink. The Amalekites inhabited this part of the land. It's understandable, actually, that they didn't appreciate Moses and his thousands of followers traipsing through and using up their resources. So the Amalekites started by picking off the weak and the old, and those falling behind the Israelite group. They were preying on a people that were weak and not battle-tested. And in short order, it got quite serious. So Moses calls for Joshua. Now, we haven't heard about Joshua yet in the scriptures, and interestingly, no introduction is actually given at this point. It was just assumed when Exodus was written that the hearers would already know who Joshua was, that he was chosen as Moses' successor and was like the war chief of their collective clans. "Joshua," Moses called out, "you need to find some soldiers." It was an insane request, since none of them had done this before. Not one of the Israelites had fought in a war or a battle. They had been slaves. Their parents and grandparents had been slaves, and the generations before that too, stretching back 4 centuries. They only knew slavery. Slavery meant you didn't go out and fight the battles. You stayed back and built storehouses for Pharaoh. So poor Joshua was handed an impossible task: find soldiers. I imagine him going group to group to group of Israelites, asking them, "Hey, can you walk? Are Are you strong? Are you of age? Do you have a sword? No? Anything sharp and pointy? Is there anything you can do? They had no choice. Unprepared as they were, they had to fight. They were being attacked. They were being picked off by an enemy they don't know. They were ill-prepared to defend themselves. They had no strategy. All they knew was to drink water from a rock and eat bits of flake off the desert floor each morning. In Egypt, they could make bricks, but they didn't even have the supplies to do that now. So, pretty limited resume. Joshua, Moses called out, you need to find some soldiers. Now, I wonder what Moses did next. You know, you've just sent your wingman out to do the impossible. In the movies, I think you'd see a clip of Moses pacing back and forth in his tent. Think, Moses, think. What to do before all of them were wiped out by the Amalekites. It's important to note that Moses also wasn't a strategist. He wasn't a military leader. He had been a spoiled prince of Egypt for the first part of his life, and then after running away, he became a shepherd in the house of Jethro, the high priest of Midian. This was not in his skill set. Even after God sent Moses back to Egypt to confront Pharaoh, Moses was equipped with nothing more than the staff in his hand and a promise in his heart. His brother, Aaron, went with him as the spokesman because, to top it all off, Moses had a speech impediment. Public speaking was not his forte either. He would have felt extremely ill-equipped to face the Amalekites in battle. But people's lives hung in the balance. It wasn't optional. And so after a time, Moses came out of his tent and faced Joshua. Go find soldiers, he said, and tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. It was all he had to work with. He would pray to God and stand with his arms up, holding the staff God had given him, the staff he had used to part the Red Sea. Would it work? He didn't know. But it was all he could offer. He knew he was too old to join them in battle. So Joshua did as Moses told him, and the next day Joshua and the willing and able-bodied Israelites he could muster up fought the Amalekites, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Now, Aaron, we have already met, right? He was Moses' big brother, and he would become the high priest of Israel. Less is known about Hur, other than Jewish traditions or midrash, which seems to suggest that he was Moses' brother-in-law, having wed Moses' sister Miriam. So the three older men head up the hill of Rephidim together, and staff in hand, Moses raised his arms, a sign of prayer. And whenever Moses held up his hands, Israel prevailed. It was working. But holding your arms up, especially while holding a large, heavy staff, is exhausting. The muscles tire, lactic acid is produced in abundance, and you start shaking a little bit. All you want to do is release the tension, to put down your arms. But if Moses lowered his arms, Scripture said, he put the people of God at risk. For whenever he did so, the tides of the battle turned, and the Amalekites would begin to prevail. Seeing him struggling, Aaron and Hur hurried to do what they could do to help both Moses and the Israelites. First, they got Moses a seat, a stone on which to sit and rest his body. And then with him seated, Aaron and Hur were able to stand on either side of him and lift his hands so that the Israelites would continue to prevail. First, they took care of their leader, And then through the leader, they ensured the care of the people of God. Because the people were up against something they had never experienced before, too. So, church, think back. Think back to the week of March 15th, 2020. Our corner of the world was suddenly blindsided with the reality that a virus that was sweeping the globe had finally landed on our shores. To keep our people safe from this new enemy, we had to make swift decisions and take action in ways we've never had to do before. We closed our doors after worship that Sunday. We shut down ministries. We locked the building. And then, as a ministry and leadership team, we looked at one another and said, now what? Like Moses, I found myself pacing in my office. Think, Foxall, think. This is not what I or any clergy person have been trained to deal with. I am not a doctor or a scientist. I have no degree in public health and safety. I'm just a minister of word and sacrament. All I have is the symbolic staff in my hand, the tool of a shepherd, and God's promise in my heart. So I turned to the Joshuas in my life, to Joe and to Gary, and I said, go, not to find soldiers, but go prepare our technology. We must act swiftly so we can take as much as we can of our worshiping life online. Our people are scared. They're unsure. We need to equip them, to connect them, empower them to continue in the faith, to fight the good fight. Help them to know that they are not alone. In those first few weeks, I stood awkwardly in front of this camera, and I preached the good news, the only tool in my belt, praying and praying and praying, arms outstretched, that God would continue to give each of you the strength that you needed for the battle. Of course, our battle is not against Amalekites. It's not even really against people. Our battle was against the anxiety and fears of an unknown enemy, of contagion and quarantine, the closing of schools and places of worship, restaurants, stores, and malls, parks cordoned off, state of emergency declared, economic hardship, our way of life coming to a grinding halt. We had the sudden urge to hoard. Do you remember that? Do you remember when we couldn't find toilet paper or Lysol? Praying, 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 arms outstretched. Into April and May, news sources became more frightening than they were informative. Everyone had an opinion, of course. By this point, a new enemy had entered the ring, that of isolation and the crushing weight of mental health, and the realization that this was going to go on for a long time. It is not good, said God in the Garden of Eden, that a human being is alone. Thankfully, by this time, we had found our stride in offering online worship here at Knox and had gotten even into some other online ministries. Arms outstretched, staff in hand, praying, 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 and the people of God were overcoming their invisible enemy. But here's the part you didn't see in those first few weeks. When you tuned in on Sunday morning and saw your chipper ministry team and leadership welcoming and reassuring you, you didn't see how tired my arms grew. You didn't see how scared I was, or how desperately I prayed. How I was afraid of letting you down as a pastor. How afraid I was for any one of you to get sick. I was afraid of my own family getting sick. I cried a lot, and I worried how it would affect my kids. I didn't know what I was doing or even what to do. I spent a lot of time praying. I slept more than usual or didn't sleep at all. Maybe you can relate. But then, without any pomp or ceremony, my own Aaron and Hur came. And these friends stood with me. They took care of my body, mind, and heart. Like Aaron and Hur placing a stone under Moses' tired and sore body so he could rest, my wing women came alongside of me, and they listened. They reassured, they prayed, and they made sure that I got off the sad couch to go for a walk once in a while. They made sure I put my feet in the dirt in the garden or in the lake. There were weeks in the early part of this pandemic when I could do little more than write and record for Sunday. I was paralyzed in my own ability to lead, never mind cast a vision for the future. And when I could not do it myself, they came and they held up my arms for me. And you probably didn't even see it. Overwhelmed as you were with your own battles, figuring out how to work from home, how to get groceries safely, how to homeschool and order things online. But there were times when I was in front of you leading worship, but it was others who were holding up my arms. And I just want to thank them. They know who they are, and I shan't embarrass them. But I am so grateful to them and to the example we have in Moses and his friends. Leadership is a shared experience, and caring for one another as a people of God is a shared responsibility. Aaron and Hur didn't just take Moses home for a nap or suggest he take a sabbatical. They kept him there in the thick of things so he could still lead and pray. They kept him there for the sake of the people of God. But they held up his arms. They did that. Aaron and Hur, scripture says, held up Moses' hands, one on one side and the other on the other side, so his hands were steady until the sun set. And Joshua defeated the Amalekites and his people with the sword. They were there to help. And that's what we do. In Luke chapter 22, verse 32, Jesus was speaking to Peter about the disciples, and he said, "Go strengthen all the brothers." In Acts 18, verse 23, the Apostle Paul traveled back and strengthened all the disciples again. And in Romans, he said, "For I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to strengthen you." In 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 2, Paul said, "We sent Timothy to strengthen and to encourage you in the faith." This is what we do as the people of God. We strengthen each other and we hold up each other's arms so that God may be glorified and so that the people of God might prevail against their enemies, even the ones we never actually see, the ones that hide within us. In our lives, each of us will be in the battle alongside the people of God. That's inevitable. And at some point in our lives, each of us will also be Moses, responsible to lead. And there will come times when each of us will be Aaron or Hur. And actually, sometimes that's the most important but challenging place to be. Because we don't want to be presumptuous, do we? They didn't roll up beside him and say, "Hey, Moses, you're looking a little rough. Buddy, can we get you a chair?" But neither should we be afraid to ask. Something like, "So we're going to put this chair right here, and if you need to, please go ahead and sit down. We're going to stay right here by your side, because this is hard work." God has given us each other. And so let us serve one another in word and prayer and deed, sharing the load, sharing the burden, sharing the joy and the responsibility. May we find on the tip of our tongues those blessed words, brother, sister, Friend, let me serve you. Let me be as Christ to you. And then pray that I may have the grace and the humility to let you be my servant too. To God be all the glory. Amen.